Hello and welcome to this week's Tuesday encouragement. So glad that you've chosen to click the button to watch this encouragement today. Really pleased in a few moments to be able to introduce Chris Balchin to you, who has a short story to share today about when he ran in the New York Marathon, but also a story about healing in the lives of two people. So I hope you'll be interested to watch that in just a moment. Just a quick reminder from me, this coming weekend is Kay Bolton's induction and ordination service. You're warmly invited to join us. 11 o'clock that's going to start. It's happening entirely on Zoom. If you haven't yet registered to say that you're coming, we would appreciate it if you'd let us know, because we need to manage our Zoom account. If you haven't received that link for any reason, then please do contact Julie in the church office and she'll be pleased to give it to you and make sure that you're registered to join us. If you've never been to an induction or an ordination before, I really hope you'll enjoy joining us this time around. We basically will be telling the story of Kay's journey to accredited church ministry here with us at CBC, and telling the story about how God is, in a sense, done a dot to dot, following the dots from 1, 2, 3, 4 and through the different stages to make the picture that leads to this point. So join us if you can on Saturday, 11 o'clock. Well, now it is my privilege to introduce to you Chris Balchin, who's going to share today's Tuesday encouragement.
It was early one Sunday morning. It was cold, it was wet, and I found myself on a coach being bussed with a group of strangers out to Staten Island, preparatory to taking part in the New York Marathon. After I'd arrived at the recreation area, which was the gathering point, and I'd drunk my obligatory bottle of water and ate my obligatory banana, I found that I still had well over an hour to kill before the race started. I saw these two very large marquees in the area, and I asked somebody what they were all about, and I was told that it would be because America was a religious country and it was a Sunday morning. They were there so that people could gather for religious services. One of the marquees was set aside for the Jews and one for the Christians. Curiosity nearly took me into the Jewish marquee, but in the end I played safe and went for the Christian one. I was told that the format of the time together was going to be that the various people who were there, and there were several hundred people in the marquee, it was a sort of an open mic session, and they were going to be invited to take part, just saying why they were running in the New York Marathon on that day. And that made me think, what would I say? What will I say if I get the chance? And I realised that the reason I was there was because 1997 had been a very difficult year for my wife Ginny and I. At the beginning of the year, she had been diagnosed with a very aggressive form of breast cancer, and it had been a year set aside really for surgery, very aggressive chemotherapy involving a stem cell transplant, and then radiotherapy. It was also a year when I incidentally was made redundant, but that seemed to fade into insignificance compared with our other issues. We needed a focus beyond our circumstances, and bizarrely running in the New York Marathon was that focus for me and for us. Obviously I was praying that Ginny would be well enough to accompany me. I decided I would try and raise money through my run for the Cancer Relief Macmillan Fund, who have been very supportive towards us. Well, due to excellent treatment from the NHS, a change in diet and a tremendous amount of prayer, Ginny recovered sufficiently to be able to accompany me. But as usual, thinking about these things took far too long, and by the time I thought I might say something, there was a long queue of people lined up to contribute. I remember particularly, even after all these years, what one person had to say. He told us that he was a Baptist minister of the First Baptist Church in Brooklyn, and he was running in the marathon in order to remember a friend of his, a member of his congregation called Maurice. He told us that he had met Maurice about 10 years before when he'd received a call from the local hospital. The hospital had called him because Maurice had asked them to try and find them a Christian minister who could come and explain to him something that had happened to him. And this guy, this minister, happened to be in the church that was closest to the hospital. When he arrived at the hospital to meet Maurice, he found a man who had been living on the streets for well over 20 years. Since he was a teenager, he'd been down and out, homeless, into all sorts of drugs, narcotics, alcohol abuse. And it was when he was approaching middle age that he had totally collapsed. His body had given up, and dying on the street, the police had taken him to the local hospital. And he told the minister how after he was in the hospital, one night he'd said to God, for whom he'd had no time up until then, "Look, I'm in Last Chance Saloon. I'm going to die. If you're there, please meet with me." After he'd gone to sleep that night, in the middle of the night, he woke up to find a light on in his room. And he thought one of the nurses had come in, but he realised that the lights weren't on. And in fact, it was just a light that was shining on his feet and gradually moved up his whole body to his head and then went out. In the morning, he discovered that he had regained the use of his feet and his legs. And over the next few days, his bodily functions returned. He began to think much more clearly, and he wondered whether he might be able to be actually discharged. But before doing so, he wanted to find out, if he could, what had happened to him. So he asked if he could see a Christian minister. The pastor explained to him that it sounded as though God had answered his prayer and had met with him and performed some sort of miracle in his life. Upon discharge, Maurice went into the church's hostel, and for the past 10 years he had worked amongst the down and outs of Brooklyn on behalf of the church's ministry to them. Maurice had sadly died earlier that year, but such had been the dramatic increase in his health and strength that every year for the past 10 years he'd taken part in the New York Marathon and had run on behalf of the church's work amongst the down and outs. And the pastor explained that that was what he was doing there. He was running in memory of Maurice. Running in the New York Marathon is an unforgettable experience, passing from Staten Island across the bridges into Brooklyn, the Jewish Quarter, the Bronx, Manhattan, and finally Central Park, all these places that you've heard about but never actually visited. And the great encouragement for me was that Ginny was well enough to join with me. As I said, I've always remembered Maurice's story, even after all these years. God doesn't always answer our prayers in a dramatic way. I guess if we're going to be honest with ourselves, he rarely does. But in that year, I experienced not only the miraculous story I was told about Maurice, but we also experienced Ginny's healing and recovery and the 23 wonderful added years that God has given to us. Well, I know that 2020 has been a challenging year for all of us, and for some even more so than for others. But just as in the two cases I've mentioned, which were a great encouragement to me, the clouds just sometimes pass and a beam of sunshine from God shines through. I pray that that will be the same for you, and that God will encourage you through what I've been able to say today and through other methods and means coming into your life. that the sun will shine through the clouds for you too. So God bless you.